This is a short presentation of our class that we teach at Fremont High School called AP Statistics. First thing I want to talk about is students that succeed in the class. So typically they're students that are good at math. That doesn't mean you have to be brilliant. It doesn't mean you have to have completed calculus or pre-calculus. But you do need to be kind of interested in math and enjoy it. If you're coming from Algebra 2 or Math Analysis, you should have done well in those classes. The other thing about students in this class is that succeed are typically students that can read and comprehend what they read, especially in problem descriptions. And also, you've got to be able to write. Students that can write neatly have an advantage, and students that can articulate the logic of their thinking and draw conclusions based on the mathematical computations they do tend to do well in the class. Study habits are critical, like most AP classes, but reading the chapters in the textbook is a big deal. And students that just have the discipline to say, you know, I'm going to take an hour or two and I'm going to sit down and read the chapter, they're the ones that really do great in the class. Students that are willing to allocate time to do the homework problems properly and then make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes, those are also students that tend to learn fastest and do well on the tests. And certainly students that enjoy using a calculator and sometimes a computer to do problems, they will also do well in the class. It's not required that you have computer skills, but we teach you a few things about Excel in the class. A couple other things is that you will need to be able to retain the skills that you learn in first semester and apply them in second semester. So just learning and making sure that you just don't learn it once, but you learn it and keep it, so to speak, throughout the entire year is really important. And then staying organized is important as well, especially when it comes time to study for the midterm and final exams. If you're an organized person, then you don't spend time organizing to study. You can just start studying. Okay, a little bit about workload. So you're expected to do homework between each class. Usually there's somewhere between 5 and 10 problems. There's fewer problems assigned on a Monday night if there's a class on Tuesday. But there are problems assigned over the weekend. There's just no way we can get through the course without having homework over the weekend. Or you can do it on a Friday, but it's assigned and it's considered weekend homework. So a little bit about the schedule. We cover 17 chapters in the first semester. There's 4 unit tests, 2 mini projects that you do usually in teams, and then a midterm exam. That's the primary grading. There's also quizzes and homework things that we do. In January, from January to April, we go through the last part of the book, so another 10 chapters, and we do 3 unit tests, 1 mini project, and then a final exam. The final exam is done at the end of April, typically about a week after you come back from spring break, and it covers both first and second semester. After that, I try to grade it and get it back to you, so then you have it as a study guide, and then typically the AP test is the first or second week of May. After that, we work on a final project, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the course topics, understanding data, linear models, probability, experiment, survey design, and hypothesis testing with probability models. This is the core part of the course. This is what you use. I'm going to go through it a little bit more detail. So first semester, we talk a lot about where does data come from, and we look at how to design surveys and do random sampling. And then we look at how to design a good experiment, do random assignment. The whole emphasis here is making sure that we get really good data that accurately represents the population that we're trying to measure so that we can draw good conclusions, so that we're empowered when we do our mathematics. After that unit, then we look at how to describe data. So a lot of times data is just too overwhelming to look at. So what we want to do is make graphs. So on the left is an example of a segmented bar chart that's used to describe categorical data, and on the right is a histogram used to describe quantitative data. We also teach you how to use like dot plots and other kinds of plots, and then here on the right is multiple box plots that we can use to compare distributions. So you learn a lot of tools to look at data and analyze data, and we go in great detail. Finally, we start building linear models, and some of you have probably seen scatter plots, used them in science and maybe some other math classes, but we go into a lot more detail in this class, making sure that the model is really appropriate for the data, and then learning appropriate ways to use the model to do predictions. Finally, this is the last unit in first semester. We talk about probability. We study it in somewhat great detail, and we look at conditional probability. We learn how to diagram problems so that because some of us, including myself, can be overwhelmed at first by a problem that sounds complicated. So we learn how to diagram the problem, which helps us kind of get more comfortable at understanding the probability situation. And so that helps us solve the problems by modeling things. So we make a lot of pictures when we do probability problems. The last thing that we learn is how to use the standard normal model to do probability calculations, or to represent data that's symmetric. So that's the end of first semester. Then you come back from the holiday breaks, and what we do is we study this thing called the central limit theorem, and it tells us that if we sample from almost any population, if our sample size is large enough, we can assume that this thing called at that bottom here, this bell-shaped curve, we can assume that this thing is going to be a normal model. And that empowers us to do computations for hypothesis testing. So then we start looking at how to do a hypothesis test. And we throughout the second semester, we learn how to do hypothesis tests for different types of data. So proportions or percents, means, linear associations, and other kinds of categorical data. So there's a trend that we follow. We learn how to write hypotheses and organize a hypothesis test a little bit like a jury trial, where if you may know that you're innocent until proven guilty. So we set up the hypotheses so that we have to use the data we collect and the mathematical models that we make to show that we can prove something, to provide evidence. So we check for model conditions, and we perform calculations, and then we write a conclusion. Here's an example of a problem. So you can see right off the bat that there's a lot of reading that you have to do. You have to read a lot of stuff in order to sort of understand what the problem is all about. Typically you're given data like this, or it's summarized in some way, and then you're asked to solve some kind of problem. A solution would look like this. So this is a typed version, so a lot of times we handwrite things, obviously, but you can see we make hypothesis statements, and we use notation and language to do that. Then we have to check a variety of conditions, so there's a lot of writing to do, and we use our calculator to create a histogram or some other picture of the data. Finally, we do some computations that tell us what kind of conclusion we can draw. And then we make an inference, and so you have to write a sentence or two on what your conclusion is. So this pattern is applied for all these different versions of data, so it becomes a little bit systematic over time, and students become comfortable with it. Sometimes second semester is a little bit easier for some students. The final project, after you take the test, this is kind of a fun time, because picture you're a senior and it's your last month of school for most students. So what you do is with a couple partners, you design either a survey or an experiment, and then you go out and you actually collect data, live data on your own, and you've set up some hypotheses, so you're trying to prove something or show something. And then what you do is you pull all this stuff together and do the computations and publish your conclusion in a PowerPoint presentation. And then you present that to the class, and that can sometimes be, we bring in a lot of guests if we can, including parents for extra credit. The main thing is to show what you've learned. It's kind of a fun time, and generally students usually pick up a lot of extra credit when they do this project. Here's some examples of some of the problems that we work on. As you can see, the data that we use for the homework problems and almost everything comes from all over the place. Pregnancy, shopping, alcohol abuse, twins, hurricanes, fire safety. We can get data almost anywhere. And so that's one fun part of the project, is that almost every day you're working on something different. So if you have more questions, this PowerPoint presentation or a version like it can be found on Mr. Hardy's School Loop site under New Student Locker. The course syllabus is also there. And if you have any particular questions, try to find Mr. Hardy in room 126. Usually you can find me there during lunch break, but oftentimes after school and during Friday advisory I'm also there. If I'm not in room 126, I'm probably in room 125, which is just right next door. Okay, I hope that helps.